In this video, we are going to deploy our application using the Azure Static Web Apps service. So as you can see here, our application is running locally. So we can see the local host 4280 because we are using Azure Static Web Apps CLI. So right now it's time to deploy our application using Azure Static Web Apps integrated with GitHub Actions. So also we are going to use GitHub Actions. I will ask all of you here to deploy this application, actually to include this project in some GitHub repository, because we will need to use GitHub Actions, and to use GitHub Actions we need to include our project inside in some GitHub repository. Okay, so here I'm simulating that since the beginning I'm committing my project since the beginning. So here is my project, so I need to deploy this project using Azure Static Web Apps with GitHub Actions. So what should I do right now? So let's open our Visual Studio Code. So the next thing that we need to do is to install extension called Azure Tools. So once you install this extension, you will see this Azure logo here, and then you will see this signing to Azure. So in this moment, you will need to create a free Azure account. So feel free to create the Azure account from here inside it using the Visual Studio Code. So in my case, I'm going to use my personal Azure account. And also you see this message, you are signed in now and can close this page. So right now we can starting to use the Azure Static Web Apps inside in our Visual Studio Code. So in this case, let's see a few tabs here. For example, API management, resources, workspace, help and feedback. So in this case, let's choose this tab here, resources, and here we will see our subscription. In this case, I have a subscription, and here you will see a bunch of free Azure services that you can use in your Azure free account. For example, App Services, Azure Cosmos DB, Azure Functions, or even PostgreSQL, or Static Web Apps, storage accounts, virtual machines. In our case, let's choose Static Web Apps. Now is the moment that we starting to deploy our application. So clicking the right button here, the mouse, choose the option Create Static Web App, and here we have to enter a name for the new Static Web App. In this case, let me include here Prisma Azure SQL App and my little name here, GLAW. Enter. Here you can select a region for Azure Functions API stage environments. So in this case, I would like to select a different region here. So in this case, try to choose a region pretty close from you are living. For in my case, I'm living here in Brazil. So in this case, I have to choose between West US2, East US2, or even Central US. But usually I'm used to use West US2. But if you're living, for example, East Asia or even West Europe, try to use these options here. So in my case, let's choose West US2. Here you can choose a build preset to configure the full project structure. So in this case, you can choose between Angular, React, Svelte, or even Blazor, Gatsby, Hugo, or even a custom project. So in my case, I'm going to use Vue.js because our full stack application is based in the client side is based in Vue.js. Here I have to enter the location in my application code. So in this case is the directory from the client side. So as you can see here, we have this folder here called Prisma-Azure SQL-test. So in this case, I have to go inside this folder in the client. So let's include here a /client, enter. And here also I chose Vue.js as a framework. They are telling me here, look, Glaucia, you are using Vue.js. So the artifact folder is gist. So in this case, let's let it this way here as a gist, and that's it. Just only that's it. Once you received this message, successfully created a new static web app, so try to click in this button here, open actions in GitHub. So let's open here. You will be redirect inside to the CI/CD GitHub Actions job here. So let's see something here to build the deploy job. Let's wait a little bit more. Looks like our job was built successfully. So we can see every step in the job here. So if you want to see the application in the cloud, we can see here in the line 294. And let's see if the application is working correctly. So let's list all employees, and it is working. Let's test it out, our application. So let's go back to the create a new employee. Everything is working here. But let me show you something very important here, because probably you have to include some important information here. Let's go back to the Visual Studio Code. And here we can see this Azure Static Web Apps application here. So let's open inside in the Azure portal here. Inside in the Azure portal, we will see all the Azure Static Web Apps you already deployed using here the Azure portal. So let's choose this one that we recently created here. Here in the configuration is very important to include the database URL. So in this case, let's click in this button plus add. In this case, you will go to return to the Visual Studio Code. Inside in the .env file here, api.env, you will copy this information here, database URL, all the connection string inside in the Azure portal in the Azure Static Web App. So let's copy this information here, paste here, okay, and save. All the important thing that you need to do is, for example, once you deployed this application here inside integrated with the GitHub Actions, you will see a new folder called .github/workflows. And inside in this folder, you will see a YAML file. I will ask all of you here to do this. Return to the Visual Studio Code. You will see this folder here inside in the project, as you can see here. And now I will ask all of you here to include ./API. And here in the line 34, I will ask all of you here to include env. And then in the line 35, I will ask all of you here to include the node version. In my case, I'm using here 14. And then a pre-build command. So in this case, I'm using here this command here, which is, in this case, this one here, which is npx prisma at 3.11.0 generate. And then, and commit these changes here. Now return to the GitHub repository and click in the Actions tab, and you will see running again the GitHub Actions. And work it. But let's see something very important here. As you can see here, when we see list all employees, we can see the localhost 71/API/employees. Don't have any connection here. This is happening because we have to make a little change here. In this case, let's go back to the code here. And again, inside in our client side here, we have to go to the source, services, API, and then we have to comment this line here, 16, and return to the line 19 here, and that's it. And let's commit again this code. And again, let's return to our GitHub repository. Let's see the action again. And let's see again, building our job again. Our job finished here. So let's go back to the Visual Studio Code. Open the Azure Logo extension here again. Let's list all employees again, and it's working. Well done. We already finished. So as you can see, it's pretty easier to deploy our application using Azure Static Web Apps extension inside in the Visual Studio Code integrated with GitHub Actions. So see you in the next video.